My name is Richard Heidemann, and I have the privilege of serving as president of the American Zionist movement. Thank you very much. On behalf of the 29 member and affiliate and Zionist youth organizations that make up the family of the American Zionist movement, we're indeed so pleased and proud to be here at Park East. And we're only here at Park East because the esteemed rabbi, the great rabbi, the rabbi who is wise and wonderful and welcoming, made sure to let the American Zionist movement know that we are welcome in his home. Please welcome Rabbi Arthur Schneier, Park East Synagogue.
I don't want to talk to you as a Zionist. I want to talk to you today about Arthur Schneier as a Holocaust survivor. Holocaust survivor. And I must tell you, after the war, 1945, the DP camps, we didn't know where to go. We were DPs, displaced. And finally, we lived to see the rebirth of Medinat Israel. And after the war, anti-Semitism that resulted in the Holocaust was like a cancer in remission. It was there. It was a cancer in remission. And now, sadly enough, it has metastasized. Metastasized and widespread in Europe. And then regrettably, we thought it was only Europe. To me, as a Holocaust survivor, Wednesday, this last Wednesday was a black day, a dark day. I never thought that in the United States Congress, a resolution condemning anti-Semitism in Congress would be turned into a Cholent Minestrone resolution. Cholent Minestrone resolution. So what should have been a clear-cut denunciation of an anti-Semitic diatribe became a victory. I want you to know that I subscribe, having devoted half a century of my life, religious freedom, human rights for everyone in different parts of the world. So I subscribe to the advisory of CARE, leading Muslim organization, who hailed Wednesday as a historic moment. The halls of power bowed to the pulse of the street. An end to the double standards. Why? Because we managed to organize, I stand with Elan, silencing the criticism of Israel as an apartheid policies. Friends, to me, this is a turning point. It's an awakening call. It's a time not to be silent. And if there could be, if we can organize, if our adversaries are able to organize an Elan, we stand with Elan, American Zionists should wake up, and we can also do the same thing and do it. I'm not the main speaker, but I had to share with you the pain. Holocaust survivor, having encountered this onslaught here in our blessed United States. We're before Purim. How appropriate. Let me read to you. Mordechai tried to convince Esther, intervene on behalf of your people. And she's silent. Al tedami benafshech lehimalet beit hamelech bikol haYehudim. Do not imagine that you will be able to escape in the king's palace when any other way than the rest of the Jews. My message to my fellow Zionists, we have to be the moving engine to instill against pride in Zionism. And as President Macron of France said, anti-Zionism, anti-Israel is a camouflage for anti-Semitism. That's what it is. So we cannot just be silent. That's my message. As a proud Zionist, grateful to Hashem, and we should say it together, Hodel Hashem ki tov ki leolam chasdo, that we are the privileged generation that has seen Israel reborn, our dream fulfilled. We have to stand together and not be silent. So, Elan, you have a great challenge, and we're with you. God bless you all. Thank you.
Rabbi, thank you for the charge. Thank you for setting us throughout your entire career on the right path. Thank you for all you've done and will continue to do for Israel and for the Jewish people. Ambassador Dani Dayan is the Consul General of Israel. He has served with distinction here in New York. But he is not the only ambassador here in New York or the only ambassador here tonight. As many of you know, the American Zionist movement, in partnership with the March of the Living, has had the privilege of escorting, of inviting, of working with, and of being with ambassadors from the United Nations from all over the world who joined us on the 2018 March of the Living in Auschwitz and marched from Auschwitz to Birkenau. They went on to Israel. After Yom HaShoah, they went on to Israel to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut. 2 months ago, we took another group of ambassadors from the United Nations, from countries from all over the world, to the Poland Jewish Museum in Warsaw, where we had dinner among the history of 1,000 years of Jewish history in Poland. And the following day, we went to Majdanek in a snowstorm. And arm in arm, we walked into the gas chamber. And we looked up at the ceiling, at the shower heads, and we looked across at the canisters of Zyklon B. To a man, to a woman, the ambassadors from the United Nations, from all over the world, knowing that they are not loved by every country, knowing that they are not loved or even sometimes respected or appreciated for their dedication and their hard work. They came with us to Poland. They came with us to Israel. And a number of them have joined us here tonight. We are indeed honored to have with us, and if I mispronounce, I apologize, Ambassador Daria Kuret from Slovenia, Ambassador Tiboro Tito Kiribatas, Ambassador Max Rai, Papua New Guinea, Ambassador Bisanya Kadari, Albania. And to share a few words with us, Ambassador Ahwe Bona Malwell from South Sudan. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Richard. Good evening. Shalom. Actually, I just want to say to Richard and to her blog to thank them on behalf of my colleagues. I have been going on these trips to revisit, the history of Holocaust, invited by Richard and the Embassy of Israel. And these visits, I want to say, they do more than what you could do in the halls of the United Nations, because it's, you feel it, and it hits home when you are actually go through the steps where the Holocaust happened and how it happened and the people who suffered there. And as the rabbis say, he's a survivor, and it's unfortunate if it's actually the anti-Semitism is raising its ugly head again. It's very unfortunate. It has to be stopped. So I agree with you, Rabbi. Also, we were lucky this time actually to have a few minutes with the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, who came to talk to us. And as you know, Netanyahu had just came from Chad, flying through South Sudan. We cut his flying time. He has to go around to avoid all these countries that will not allow him to fly. So we did a small thing. We cut his visit by just 1 hour, but we were happy to do it. And when we talked to him, I told him that actually next time we want him not just to fly over, but to stop to have a South Sudanese cup of tea. And he said he will do. But actually, he shouldn't be thanking us. We should be thanking the state of Israel, because in the 60s, before we even thought about becoming independent, they're the one who sent some people to go and train us. They sent about 3 people. They walked because they had to come through Kenya, Uganda, and then they went through the jungle. She said she was in Uganda recently, and I told her, why didn't you cross over? But those Israelis officials who came just to see what the South Sudanese were struggling against, they walked. They spent with us 6 months, and actually they created the first landing strip on a dirt, and they start bringing supplies and start training. So actually our independence started with that. So we should be thankful to the state of Israel for us becoming independent now. So what we did for the Prime Minister was just a small token of saying thank you. And I thank you again, Richard, for having us. And the more you do this visit, I can assure you, the more you will see the vote at the UN will change. So keep doing it. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Erev Tov. Before I say a few words of greeting, I would like to read the greetings of a friend. March 10, 2019, dear friends, I send warm greetings from Jerusalem to the American Zionist movement Biennial National Assembly. The people of Israel are profoundly grateful for the support of Jewish communities around the world. The bonds between us are unbreakable, and we will always work to ensure that Israel remains a home for all Jews. Our people's unity is a source of great strength. We must continue to work together to combat the rising tide of anti-Semitism. We must also join together to expose the slanderous lies propagated against Israel and to define anti-Zionism as a new form of anti-Semitism. I commend you all for your dedication and contribution to our common future, and I wish you a successful event. Sincerely, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of the State of Israel. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבט אחים ציונים גם יחד. There is no more wonderful event for me than to be among Zionists. Actually, Richard, this noon, I participated in the mega event of Nefesh B'Nefesh for potential Olim Chadashim. And I told them that as a former Oleh Chadash myself, 48 years ago from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I say also to you, there are going to be difficulties, and the most important word for an Oleh Chadash is savlanut, patience. But in retrospective of 1, 2, 5, 10, and in my case, 48 years, is the best decision a Jewish individual can make. Now, we spoke a lot about, in the last days and weeks, about anti-Zionism being a form of anti-Semitism. Is it, is not? Of course it is. That goes without saying, that denying if you are an anti-Zionist, you either deny the bond between the people of Israel, Am Israel, and the land of Israel, Eretz Israel, and denying a central part of Jewish history, any central part, the Holocaust included, is anti-Semitism. And if you recognize the link and nevertheless you deny the right of the Jewish people to self-determination, for sure you are an anti-Semite. Already great friends like President Macron and Prime Minister Merkel and Prime Minister May said it explicitly. But let's not make a mistake. Zionism is not about fighting anti-Semitism. The fact that anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism doesn't mean that Zionism is all about combating anti-Semitism. Zionism is much more deeper, has a much more wide scope than only combating anti-Semitism. I stand here in front of you as a Jew by peoplehood, as an Israeli by citizenship, and as a Zionist by the deepest of my convictions. And Zionism is not only about Jewish suffering, a way to run away from Jewish suffering. Zionism is much more than that. Zionism is about Jewish redemption, about Jewish sovereignty, about Jewish independence, even if there was not even one anti-Semite in the world. Zionism is not only about giving shelter. Zionism is about fulfilling aspirations, legitimate aspirations of the Jewish people for millennia. For 2,000 years, the groom and the bride that stood under the chuppah, and in the most intimate moment in their lives, instead of kissing the bride, in Warsaw, in Sana'a, in Yemen, or in Buenos Aires, Argentina, they waited for a second and said, no, if Efkachech Yerushalayim, if I forget thee, Yerushalayim, without knowing that every single one of those grooms and brides, millions of them, were precursors of Zionism. Every single Jew that for 2 millennia, anywhere in the world, in Casablanca, Morocco, or in Ljubljana, Slovenia, prayed for rain in Eretz Israel, and not in the land in which he was sitting, was a precursor of Zionism. Until a gigantic statesman came, Theodor Herzl, a person that appears in the stage of history only once in 2,000 years. In my view, probably Rabbi Schneier will disagree with me. Usually religious persons disagree with me. They say, where is the Rambam and where is this? In my view, the greatest Jew of the last 2,000 years, Theodor Herzl. Until he converted that yearning into a political movement then came the moment in which we fulfilled our dream of returning to Zion, of reestablishing our sovereign, independent state in Eretz Israel. And I will conclude by saying that as a Zionist, a realistic Zionist, I often ask myself, do we have in this contemporary Jewish generation an extra mitzvah that is specific to this generation? For instance, there was a generation that had the extra mitzvah to try to save the European Jewry from extermination, and unfortunately, they failed. Probably it was impossible to succeed. I am not judging. Then there was a Jewish generation that had the extra mitzvah to try to liberate the Soviet Jewry and the Ethiopian Jewry, and Baruch Hashem, they succeeded. Do we have an extra obligation, an extra mitzvah in our contemporary Jewish generation? I think we have two. The first is to make sure that the Jewish state, the state of Israel, Medinat Israel, not barely exists, but exists as a robust, thriving, successful country. And the second is to guarantee the continuity of the Jewish people elsewhere. I said that as we started with Aliyah, I said that as a realistic Zionist that would like to see all of Jews in Eretz Israel, but knows that it's not going to happen immediately. So to make sure that the incredible link that started 4,000 years ago with Abraham and Sarah is not broken, that chain is not broken neither in this generation nor in the next generation of Jews. And I think that it will be a tragedy, no less than a tragedy, if each of the two big Jewish communities of the world, Israel and America, that together we compose something like 80% of American Jewry, of world Jewry. It will be a tragedy if each one of those communities chooses to be responsible only for one of those mitzvot. If Israelis see themselves, we go to the army, we pay the high taxes, we are responsible only for Israel. And American Jews say, we have here tasks to deal with. We see themselves only responsible for continuity of our Jewish life. We need cross. I don't know, cross is not the most Jewish word, but we need cross responsibility. Each Jewish community, each side of the ocean must see itself as responsible for both. Yes, Shomer Achi Anochi. Shomer Achi Anochi, the keeper of my brother. Am I the keeper of my brother in Israel? I am the keeper of my brother as an American Jew. And therefore, I want to commend the American Zionist movement. In a time in which it's horrendous, but the word Zionist, the word Zionism is vilified and maliciously misinterpreted, and became in some circles, unfortunately even Jewish circles, a four-letter word. I want to commend the American Zionist movement, its leaders, its contributors, for raising high the flag of Zionism, the flag of Theodor Herzl, the flag of Eretz Israel, the flag of Medinat Israel, the flag of the common bond between Jews everywhere, and to thank you for fulfilling those two contemporary mitzvot that I think that they are the most important mitzvot these days in our contemporary Shulchan Aruch, to do it so excellently, with such a warm heart and such decisiveness in days in which it's not the easiest of tasks. Thank you so much.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much. This is indeed an evening of tribute, celebrating the American Zionist movement and a quarter century of leadership. But we go way back. As a people, we go back thousands of years. And as a people, some have chosen to attack us, to malign us, to hold us to multiple standards, to defame us, to attempt to destroy us. Elan S. Carr serves as the special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism for the United States of America. As the special envoy, he advises the Secretary of State and accordingly the President of the United States. He advises all of us. He has come here tonight very particularly to pay tribute to a singular concept, that of equality, equality for the Jewish people, that we should not be viewed as different, we should not be the targets of hate, and we should stand together. You should know, Special Envoy Carr, that earlier today, in cooperation with the World Zionist Organization in Jerusalem, 60 rallies against anti-Semitism were held around the world, and everybody here participated in a rally that says, "Hate stops here." I could spend a long time introducing you, but I will not, because who you are speaks for itself. But more importantly, what you stand for speaks for itself. We all want you to know how honored we are that on behalf of the President of the United States, on behalf of the Secretary of State, on behalf of the entirety of the United States government, that as one of us, you are here and you came here to stand with us against hate. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elan S. Carr, Special Envoy.
I certainly do stand with you. Certainly do stand with you. My goodness, what an honor this is. First of all, what an honor to be introduced by Richard. Richard and I became great friends years ago when he was president of B'nai B'rith, and I've watched his extraordinary leadership of the Jewish community, of the Jewish people, watched in wonder. And not only have we become great friends, but we are AE Pi brothers, and that is a relationship of great meaning to me and to you. And Phyllis, my goodness, what can we say about you? Phyllis is a one-woman army, what she does. It's just tremendous, just tremendous. Herbert, thank you so much, Herb, for having me and for your leadership of AZM, which is really an organization that stands for unity. That's what AZM is, and that's a very, very important concept for our people today. I have to say a personal word about AZM because some of you in this room know my mother used to be the executive director of AZF at the time. And so I was a young kid running around the hallways of 515 Park Avenue, where used to be, now I'm really dating myself, used to be the headquarters of the Jewish world. And I would sprint, actually, not run, sprint as a little kid around the hallways. And when I got invited, I said, "Herb, you sure you want me back?" I didn't think I'd be welcome. But it's no exaggeration to say, all kidding aside, that One of the sources of my education in Jewish leadership was AZM. I remember, it is true, I remember as a young kid seeing my mother come to work, and by the way, she preceded Karen, right before Karen. Someone preceded Karen. And I remember seeing her come to work and work hard and with passion for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel. That was the memory of my childhood. And so if I stand before you today with a title that obligates me to fight to protect Am Yisrael everywhere in the world, it's in part due to you, to AZM, and to the wonderful example that you set for me as I grew up. So thank you. I owe you for that. And chazak uvaruch on everything you've done year after year, in and out, to make our people stronger and the state of Israel safer. Speaking of my mother, when she was a young girl in Iraq, she remembers one morning a knock at the door. It was early in the morning, and her father, my grandfather, still had shaving cream on his face. He answered the door. The soldier said, "Mr. Somech, you're coming with us." And my mother watched her father, my grandfather, be dragged away. He was paraded through the streets in leg irons like a slave, along with other Jews in the community. And then he was subjected to a Stalinist show trial. And he was accused of what? What do you think he was accused of? Zionism. He was accused of being a Zionist. What does that mean? We all know what that means. He was accused of being a Jew. Specifically, his charge was that he was at a rally in Baghdad distributing anti-government propaganda. And when he heard the charge, he said, "Wait a minute, Your Honor, I can actually prove that I was in Basra that day. I wasn't even at whatever rally this is. I'll bring witnesses. I was working for the British port of Basra." And the judge said, "You are challenging the charges in this case? For you, 5 years. Everyone else got 3 at his level. For you, 5 years for having the audacity to defend yourself." That was his crime. And so my mother did what no young girl should have to do. She visited her father in prison. They were going to leave the country, but they didn't. So for 2 years, they would visit him in prison. Until finally he said, "Leave, flee, don't wait for me." And so my grandmother, my mother, who was 9 at the time, and my uncle, who was a toddler, fled across the border to Iran, a very different Iran from today. The Shah was helping Jews escape and giving Jews asylum. They escaped to Iran, and from Iran to Israel. So when I am talking about anti-Semitism, my friends, let me tell you, I get it. That story is emblazoned on my family's collective history. The images of her father being paraded through the streets in leg irons will not leave my mother. And so we know what anti-Semitism is. And then I married the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. My wife's grandmother had a tattoo on her arm from being in Auschwitz. And her grandfather was also in Auschwitz. Both were liberated by Allied troops. Our people's history is a history of being driven from one place to another, desperately seeking refuge, looking often in vain for the protection of one or another diaspora country. And how blessed we are that this is the United States of America, for all our problems, for all of our imperfections, for all of what, Rabbi, you mentioned recently, disturbing as it is the most philo-Semitic country ever. Not only do I get what anti-Semitism is, I want to talk about my boss. The President of the United States is absolutely ferocious in his determination to fight for the Jewish people. He is unequivocal. He is unvarnished. In the State of the Union address, by the way, I was announced in this role on Tuesday night, the night of the State of the Union address. 2 hours later was the State of the Union address. There isn't a lot of space in that speech. It's the most prominent speech any president gives all year. And what did he do? He spent a lot of time recognizing, honoring Holocaust survivors. But he didn't just honor Holocaust survivors. He called anti-Semitism a vile poison that we must root out everywhere in the world. That's what he just said a few weeks ago. After the Pittsburgh massacre, the same day as the Pittsburgh massacre, he said something more extraordinary. He stood before a rally having nothing to do with the events in Pittsburgh. It was a rally in Illinois. And he said before a crowd of supporters cheering for him at a rally in Illinois, he said, "We stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters in the world. We will root out anti-Semitism. We must root out anti-Semitism." And then he made a promise that is unprecedented. He said, "Those who seek the destruction of the Jews, we will seek their destruction. We will seek their destruction." I actually didn't realize it at the time, but Ambassador Ron Dermer later, I met with him and he said, "I want you to know something about that statement. Never in world history has a leader said, if you go after the Jews, we're going after you." It's never been said in world history. That's what was said at that rally in Illinois. Secretary Pompeo, my boss, adores the Jewish people, has devoted himself to protecting the state of Israel and fighting anti-Semitism everywhere in the world. You want an example of how these two men want to lead our country? Well, I'm a military officer. I served in the U.S. Army, still do in the reserves. I spent nearly a year in Iraq leading an anti-terrorism team. And before this job, I was a criminal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I prosecuted gangs, household names like MS-13 and 18th Street. I'm not your typical political appointee. The President of the United States and the Secretary of State picked me for this job because they want the same ferocity and the same force brought against anti-Semitism that a military officer brings to the enemy and that a criminal prosecutor brings to a violent felon. That's what they want, and that's what they're going to get. That's what they want because, ladies and gentlemen, they understand that this is a crisis. You understand that this is a crisis. Rabbi Schneier, you said it so beautifully. This is a crisis. Anti-Semitic incidences are increasing the world over. In one country in Europe alone, in France, there was an increase of 70% in attacks against Jews in 1 year. In Belgium, hate against Jews quadrupled on the internet in 1 year. The yellow vests in France have erupted in anti-Semitic canards. In Eastern Europe, we've heard some governments make statements about the outsider Jews subverting our countries. It is in every region of the world, in every rhetorical flourish, and in every method of attack. I want to give you an example. 1 week alone, what my office dealt with, we had this horrific attack on the chief rabbi in Buenos Aires, which may have been motivated by money, but of course, any attack on Jews has to include anti-Semitism, and so there were anti-Semitic canards. "You chief rabbi, we know you're the chief rabbi." They broke his ribs. In the same week, I dealt with a book fair in Oman. Oman, by the way, no radical regime there. I'm a great admirer, let me say, of the Sultan of Oman. We've made wonderful progress in Oman. There was a book fair in Oman where the titles of the books sold in Oman, I have the pages. It's page after page after page of Mein Kampf, the Protocols of Elders of Zion, the International Jew, other potpourri of anti-Semitic titles, page after page, highlighting a book fair in a progressive Arab regime in the Gulf. I'm not even talking about other regimes. Progressive Arab regime in the Gulf. And then we had a horrific parade in Belgium where Jews were depicted in caricatures that could come out of Der Stürmer, with hooked noses, sitting on bags of money, a float like that paraded through the street in Belgium. This was within 1 week. Within 1 week. Think of all the canards mixed in that 1 week. We have an attack on a rabbi. We have Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda translated into Arabic. And we have the classic depiction of Jews with money and with hooked noses like monsters taking over the world. That's what we're dealing with. And so, my friends, I want to lay forward here tonight a few principles that will govern our work in the coming years. Principle number one is we are not going to ignore any ideology or any region. Jew hatred is Jew hatred. If it comes from the ultra-right, couched in the terms of ultra-nationalism, if it comes from the left, we will combat it regardless of the ideological clothing in which it dresses itself. Jew hatred is Jew hatred, and we're going to have our crosshairs on it, and we won't ignore any part of the ideological spectrum, nor will we ignore any region. Sometimes this is thought to be an office that focuses on Europe. There's a lot of bad news coming out of Europe. But Latin America has to be addressed, and the Arab world has to be addressed, and we have more chance to make gains in the Arab world today than we have in years. So I'm not going to ignore any ideology, and I'm not going to ignore any region of the world. Principle number two, we are going to call out the enemies of the Jewish people. We're going to be public, and we're going to be strong. We're going to pressure those who are recalcitrant. But also, we're going to empower our friends. I want to tell you some good news, not all bad news. There's a lot of bad news, but let me tell you some amazing news. When the secretary announced my appointment, I was at Dulles Airport taxiing on a plane. Literally, I mean, talk about hitting the ground running. I flew to Europe literally as I was being announced and represented the United States at two conferences. I flew to Bratislava, well, to Vienna and then to Bratislava. And in Bratislava, I represented us at a conference of the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, massive bilateral organization that came out of Helsinki with 57 countries. The first conference organized by Slovakia in its position as rotational chair in office of the OSCE was a conference on anti-Semitism. First thing they did. After representing us there, I traveled to Brussels, and I represented us at a conference on anti-Semitism of the EU. The first conference that Romania convened in its role as rotational president of the EU Council was a conference on anti-Semitism. There are friends of ours in Europe who get it, truly get it. They see that this is a conflagration, and they're asking, what is going on? I heard eloquent voices of European leaders. I'm not talking about Jews. Eloquent voices of European leaders who said, we cannot allow this to happen again. What is happening to our continent? And these leaders understand that anti-Semitism isn't only about the Jews. If it were, by the way, if it were only about protecting a beleaguered and persecuted and killed minority, that would be reason enough morally to fight it. But they understand that it's about so much more. They understand that anti-Semitism is about the future of their countries and the future of their continent. Because anti-Semitism is perhaps history's greatest barometer of human misery. Every society that has embraced this notorious evil has rotted to its core. Every society. And every society that has made anti-Semitism a part of its definition has produced human misery in a scale that defies description. And so you want to improve the human condition? You want to make things better for the children of the world? Those who are internationalists, who believe in the children of the world? By the way, so do I. You want to help the human condition? Root this out. Because anti-Semitism will guarantee human suffering. That's its history. And it's not only I saying this. There are Europeans who say it. And they understand it, and they stand up, and they talk about it. And so part of my job is not only to punish the enemies and to pressure the recalcitrant, but it's also to empower our friends. And I will empower those allies with the full weight of the United States of America, because they are doing good work. And they need to know we have their back, and they will know that. And lastly, principle number 3. And I saved the most important to last because this is the American Zionist movement. I talked about the rise in attacks against Jews. I talked about the rhetoric. But let's talk about what else is rising. A far greater rise, the biggest rise, is in the new form of anti-Semitism that clothes itself in the language of anti-Zionism. Consul General Dayan, what an honor to have you here tonight. Ambassador Dayan, you do God's work, and you said it so beautifully from the podium today. to turn Zionism into a four-letter word? How dare they? This is the anti-Semitism of the college campus. This is the anti-Semitism of the so-called elites. It is the anti-Semitism of polite and sometimes impolite conversations in the halls of European governments and in the halls of some governments closer to home. And let me tell you something. It will be my mission to tear down this fake distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. There is no distinction. There is no distinction. Zionism is who we are. Zionism is what our people believe. Zionism wasn't invented in 1948. Zionism didn't spring out of the first Zionist Congress. Zionism was born in Parashat Lech Lecha. Zionism reached its consummation in the Exodus, in Yetziat Mitzrayim, when Moses led our people to the Promised Land, to Zion. And Zionism became a feature of diaspora Jewry not 100 years ago, 2,600 years ago. 2,600 years ago in the first diaspora, where the captives of Babylon wept on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates and swore in their longing to Zion. As you said it, Ambassador, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may I forget my right arm. That is what Zionism is. It is a defining feature of who we are as an ethnic group and a nation. It is a central tenet of the Jewish religion as a faith. And anyone who attempts to steal from us our identity, our beliefs, our self-definition, our property rights in the land of Israel, anyone who does that is trading in anti-Semitism, pure and simple, and I will say it everywhere I go and with every breath I have. And so that will be our work. And we have our work cut out for us. But I want to conclude by talking about you. Because let me tell you, I can fight anti-Semitism, and we will. And I'll fight anti-Semitism with the full backing of the United States of America. And that's not too bad. But to defeat anti-Semitism, spiritually to end this indefatigable poison, even the United States can't do that by itself. For that, we need something more. And that brings me back to AZM. The purpose of AZM is achdut, unity of the Jewish people. That's why this organization exists. That's why the Conference of Presidents exists. It's to produce Jewish unity. And Jewish unity, my friends, is not a luxury. It is a necessity. I want to tell you a story. It's not a good one. 2 months ago, a student leader, wonderful young man, happens to be an API. That's not why he's wonderful. He's a student senator at Stanford University. And he introduced a resolution to have Stanford adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which, by the way, is a wonderful, it's a game changer, actually. And it's been adopted around the world, and I've been urging additional countries to adopt it, and many have. Not controversial, by the way. In the OSCE, there are 57 countries. The vote on adopting it for the OSCE was 56-1. 56-1. Russia. Everett Dirksen, Senator Everett Dirksen once said 2/3. He says, you can't get 2/3 for a Mother's Day resolution, right? 56-1 to adopt it. Not controversial. And so he put forth this student legislation at Stanford University. He had pretty much unanimous support until Jewish groups came forward and said, do not support this. We don't support this. We come from privilege. We should be focusing on oppressed minorities. We are not an oppressed minority. Do not support this. He lost all support, had to pull the bill. That was in October. In the intervening 2 months, things got so bad at Stanford that a student leader said that Jews control the media and Jews control Stanford, and then a visiting lecturer minimized the Holocaust in a lecture to students. That's what happened at Stanford. Things got so bad that he said, now I have it. And so this is fresh news. 2 weeks ago, he reintroduced the bill. This time, he had total 100% support of the Senate. Until Jewish groups came forward and said, we get it. We get it. Anti-Semitism is on fire on this campus. We'll withdraw our opposition that we expressed in October only if you take out the Israel stuff. Take out the Israel stuff. And so Matt faced a decision. Do I pull the whole thing and go home? Or do I at least get something? He decided to get something. So he changed the wording. And so what passed at Stanford University is that it is anti-Semitism to beat up Jews. Newsflash. But to demonize Israel, to delegitimize our Zionist aspiration, Hatikva bat shnot alpayim, to do that, have at it. Green light. You know who did this to us? We did this to us. This is a self-inflicted wound. How can we win? How can we win when we do this to ourselves? We have got to come together. This is not a request. This is an urgent charge. We are lost without unity. That is our history. Without Jewish unity, we can't accomplish anything. But when the Jewish people stand together, when we stand ish echad belev echad, as the Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai, there is nothing that can't be done. Even the deal to kill the Jewish people that was signed and sealed and delivered, the imperial decree that could not be undone, the wheels of genocide that were already beginning to turn, even that could be undone if we stand together. That's the message of Purim. And what does it mean to fast and to mourn, to wear sackcloth and ash? It means to take responsibility for each other. Hashomer achi anochi, exactly right. It means to take collective responsibility for the Jewish condition and for each other. That's what it means to fast for 3 days. And when the Jewish people do that, there is nothing that can't be accomplished. That's the message of the holiday we're about to celebrate. And so my question is, my friends, Jewish leaders in this room, you who have devoted yourselves to the Jewish condition, what are we going to do about this? This fragmentation, this inability to come together on key issues, what are we going to do about it? And I say to you today, as the envoy that will do our work together, be our partners. Let us do it together. We can disagree on a lot of issues. God knows we know how to do that. But when it comes to our survival, when it comes to our future, when it comes to our children and our grandchildren that look upon us with trusting eyes and expect us to bequeath to them a world that is better, when it comes to that, there can be no disagreement. If we really understand that, if we resolve to leave these conferences changed, not to move on and say it was a nice conference, but to really understand what our obligations are, because that's the purpose of gatherings like this. If we do that, then we will work tikkun olam b'malchut Shaddai. And we will make our world a better place. And that is what our children and grandchildren deserve. Thank you, my friends, for your leadership. Thank you for everything you do for Am Yisrael. And I look forward to working with you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.